The 2020 FDOT Design Manual, FDM 202 Speed Management Overview, presented by Dwayne Carver. FDM 202 was introduced in 2019, and in 2020, we made a few changes to it. Most of these changes were for consistency, either internally within the document. A few changes were made to clarify some questions that had come up after the chapter was introduced last year. This webinar will briefly go through each of these just in kind of bullet form and explain sort of what happened to each of those sections in case there's any questions about it. There were no major changes that were made to the chapter at this time, but if you'd like to know what the changes were made, we'll kind of go through them in this webinar. In the first section, which is the general section, 202.1, basically we made minor wording changes for consistency. Those changes were made throughout. Essentially, we began using the word strategies throughout. In some places, we'd been using techniques. In other places, we'd been using tools and different language. And so we wanted to make it consistent throughout that whenever we talk about, for instance, curb extensions or on-street parking or another type of speed management strategy, we use that word strategy throughout this chapter. So a lot of the places you'll see the changes made were simply those minor changes for that purpose. Under the section on lane elimination, which is 202.1.1, we added some language in there. The way it was written originally was apparently giving folks the impression that there were certain conditions where you weren't supposed to do lane eliminations, and we just wanted to clarify that we have a separate section in the FDM that talks about how to do a lane elimination, where those would take place, and you can refer to that section for that information. And the lane eliminations are intended to support the other speed management tools, and depending on what you do with the lane elimination, it may or may not be a speed management tool. So depending on what kind of things you do with that extra space that you have provided there. So we just wanted to clarify that a little bit in the chapter. The next section on speed management concepts, this was just the wording changes for consistency, where we replaced several words with the word strategy through there. Now, this was actually kind of a significant change. We introduced the term target speed, and this has been used in a number of other documents, and including some other FDOT documents over the years, and we have introduced it this year into the FDM, and there's a whole new section there, 202.2.1, that describes what the target speed is. It defines it and indicates where to find some more information about the target speed, because really the target speed a lot of times is what you're trying to work toward when you're doing a speed management project. And then the next section is 202.3, and there's a whole list of 14 or 15 different speed management tools, and we'll kind of talk about which things changed on each of those, but most of the verbiage there that was changed was trying to get us to understand the strategies approach to wording that we were trying to use. One thing that was also changed on here was the emphasizing the importance of using the existing network to support speed management strategies. We talk in this chapter about short block lengths and things like this, and we wanted to make sure that folks had that in their mind as they're looking, say, at a project in an existing urban condition where you have an existing street network, particularly one of small blocks, that we didn't come in and inadvertently cut off a lot of those small blocks in the name of access management or something else, and then create a speeding problem maybe that we didn't have before. So we realized that this was actually taking place on some of our projects, and so we wanted to add it as a speed management strategy to be aware that you should really look at your existing network before you start changing anything and see, can I use my network to support my speed management goals? And so that's kind of described in this section here. And we also added some language in 202.3.1 about roundabouts, and the notion there, we wanted to talk about tools that keep you from having drivers accelerating between roundabouts in a series. If the roundabouts are not close enough together, you can actually get speeding acceleration curve in between the roundabouts. So that's kind of discussed in there as well. So for on-street parking, we just added a little bit of language reinforcing the need to consider other strategies as well when you do on-street parking. And really this is true for all the strategies in FDM 202. They all work best when you use as many of them together as you can. And in particular for on-street parking, a lot of times you have the opportunity then to add curb extensions. You have the opportunity to either create or take advantage of short blocks when you're using that on-street parking. And for the short blocks themselves, we echo the language that I mentioned earlier about making sure you preserve those existing block structures when you're doing reconstruction of a roadway in a place that already has those small blocks intact. We want to try to preserve those as much as we can. And we added a reference in there to the traffic engineering manual. That's actually added in a couple other places as well. One change that we made from last year, we talk in the FDM, in FDM 202 about vertical and horizontal deflection. We did add a change this year for vertical deflection to indicate that the upper speed for the use of raised crosswalks, that's been increased to 30 miles an hour. Previously, it was only 25 miles an hour. That was in response to new information we've received from FHWA as part of their latest round of efforts to improve pedestrian safety. They've actually indicated that raised crosswalks are an improved safety countermeasure for crashes for pedestrians, and they actually show them going up to a higher speed. And so we actually wanted to get closer to matching that FHWA speed at 30 miles an hour. Under the speed feedback signs in 202.3.9, we removed the restriction that they would only be used when other physical design interventions are not feasible or appropriate. We basically are saying now, if you want to use speed feedback signs, go talk to your traffic operations engineer and determine where those are the right places to do it. So we kind of wanted to remove as many strings as we could from giving that might keep people from wanting to use any of these tools. And so for the speed feedback signs, there's really no reason that we need to give you further guidance on how to use those. Just mention that they're there, they can be used, and you should talk to your traffic operations folks about where are the best places to use those. This was one on speed limit pavement marking. If you don't know what that is, in 202.3.10, that's when you actually put the speed limit as a pavement marking on the roadway. So as a motorist is driving down the road, they'll see right there on the road in front of them, oh, this is now 30 miles an hour or 25 miles an hour or whatever the speed limit is. Usually you'll put that where the speed limit changes from one speed to a lower speed in that condition. And all we did there was some comma surgery. There was a comma that shouldn't have been there, and we took that out. So it was not a huge change on that one. This is another one that we made an edit for, really for clarity. In the original version of 202.3.11, we talked about median islands in the text, and we replaced that term island with raised median within the text. Raised median is actually the term that the department uses for those structures. And so that was just to clarify that and make it more consistent with the rest of the FDM. And in the section 202.3.13 on RRFBs and PHBs, we added this reference to the traffic engineering manual. So if you want to use a rectangular rapid flashing beacon or a pedestrian hybrid beacon, we want you to go clearly to the traffic engineering manual. That's where all the criteria are for those things. And we just wanted to make sure that reference was there. It should have been there last year and just didn't get added. The section on terminated vistas, we moved some language describing those up to the beginning of the section. What we realized after releasing it last year in this section 202.3.14 was that folks really didn't know what they were looking at or reading about with the terminated vista, because we didn't have it clearly defined at the front end. So we wanted to move that to the front to describe what it is when you're looking at a terminated vista. There's also a graphic in the FDM that supports that. That graphic was there last year as well, but hopefully it will be more clear for folks now. And then there's the big table, table 202.3.1. This table used to be at the beginning of the chapter. So if you open the chapter and you don't see it, don't panic. It's still there. It's just at the back of the chapter now. And the reason we felt like it needed to be in the back of the chapter was simply because it has a reference to a bunch of things that hadn't been described yet. So you could potentially be in the situation where you open it up and you're looking at a table, you don't know what you're looking at because we haven't told you what the things are in the table. So the way we did it now is we talk about the techniques first, and then the table goes at the end. So you'll presumably have had a chance to see what these different strategies are. And then when you see them in the table, you'll understand what you're looking at. And this is the end of that section. Thank you, and good luck with FDM 2020.